welcome everybody who is already here. We have more people joining all the time, but let them join. And we are happy to welcome everybody. We are today here in researchers session, which is given by InnoBoost project. I will just share my screen 1 second to tell you a few words about it. So my name is Milla, and I work here in HAMK, University of Applied Sciences in Finland. And this workshop lecture that is offered to you now is part of Run in a Boost project, which is part of the 8th Higher Education Initiative. And I share you this screen of this website, innoboost.eu, because you will find from this website more information about our project, and also from the opportunities. When you go on that, you will find the innovation for researchers part. And when you click there, then you can find this page where all the recordings and materials will be shared of these sessions that we are starting today. So we are starting with the workshop series for researchers about innovation, and we have a total of 5 sessions coming up, and all of them will be recorded, and you can watch those recordings later, or please do share to your colleagues as well if they couldn't make it today. And today we are starting with the practical tools for creating market-ready solutions. Can't wait, it will be a very interesting session for sure, delivered to us by the Technological University of the Shannon, the US. So this is just some information, and now I will stop sharing and I will give the floor to Peter, who is here from TUS today to share us his thoughts on the topic. The floor is yours, Peter.
Thank you, Milla, and welcome everybody. I think everybody is joining us in an afternoon time zone, so I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully this will be in the format that I want it to be. Can you see that screen okay?
Yes, we can see the screen and we see your slides in full screen mode.
Okay. So I suppose the first thing is just to emphasize, and you'll see in a second, the word that means the most to me here is the practical tools. I suppose throughout university structures around the world, there is a lot of emphasis and increasing emphasis of converting research into societal impact. And the piece in the middle that makes that possible is business models. And when you have a business model, you have revenue. But that doesn't necessarily always mean it's very commercial. It can be a charity or it can be a philanthropic platform. So my name is Peadar Casey. My role in TUS is to coordinate a program called TUS Works, which is a relatively new program started as part of a TUS Rise initiative, which is an Irish government sponsored initiative. And the purpose of TUS Works is to do exactly what I'm going to talk to you today about, which is connect research to society and align it with the most appropriate business model at the time. So within TUS Works, we're combining 2 things at the moment. We're picking up the research that already exists, and we're also trying to work on the infrastructure so that we can align new research in a more practical way. And I'm joined today by my colleague Anna, who is doing an awful lot of work in creating those pathways. And like I said, capturing what we already have, but also aligning it with where we want to be. So just if you have any question while I'm presenting, feel free to raise your hand or put question in the chat. Just to start with, maybe if you could, maybe in the chat, let me know where you're coming from so that I have an idea of what countries, and Also, if you don't mind, maybe just your area of research, because as I'm working through the slides, if I know where you're coming from, I can pick up on maybe some practical examples. Okay, so this is very quickly just a summary of what I'm going to talk about. It's not a lot of slides, um, just a little bit myself. And then this is a model that I've created myself to do this job that I'm working on. And I'm going to explain to you the reason behind it, but also the various steps in it. And along this, there's one or two breakout sessions for about 10 minutes each, where I'm going to get you to have some practical discussions with some of your colleagues that are on this call. So for just first of all, to reiterate, research as a is a very funding intensive initiative. And like I said, there's a lot of emphasis now on being able to identify, what impact is it having. And in doing that, in our case, we're looking at the ideas of pathways to purpose, and that's with a socioeconomic perspective. So why do we need to show impact? Why should we want to show impact? And also, I suppose to describe the process here, you're going from discovery to the development and the delivery. And in a formal research capacity, there's a lot of time spent on the discovery. And in a lot of the processes that I've seen, the researcher is immersed in a research environment. It could be for 4 or 5 years of a PhD. It might be 2 or 3 years of a research project. And what we're starting to do, and also seeing a lot of other academic institutions doing, is in some way running a development process uh, in tandem with the discovery process, so that you get to the delivery phase a lot quicker, and it becomes more parallel rather than sequential. Of the pressures of this come from obviously a lot of public funding is looking to see practical application and socioeconomic influence. And by running that parallel process, you also allow the researcher to tap into their own entrepreneurial ambition, which when I've dealt with a lot of researchers, they all, underneath the surface, have something that they want to change, something that they'd like to see their research contributing to. It may be a specific topic, or it may be a much wider society. Um, this weekend, in our one of our campuses in Athlone in Ireland, we ran a hackathon, which was a NASA Space Apps hackathon. And there was a lot of researchers, uh, both current researchers, postdocs, and undergraduate students that came to that event. In total, there was about 220 students, which divided up into 40 teams. And it was interesting when you talk to those people, the teams that they were in and the topics and the challenges that they took on. Underneath the surface, it was their own personal desire to make a difference in a lot of cases in a certain way that they took it on. Some of them took on challenges which were related to the science that's being explored within space environments. Some of them were looking at data and weather. Some of them were looking at materials and the recycling in a circular system. And this also ties into the one of the next pillars of the benefits of research to revenue, and the need for it is the dimension of societal balance between regional and large urban environments. And again, this is very much in the context of TUS as a regional university. And within that hackathon, we had another example where we called it what was a side quest, which was looking at the Shannon River, which is what the university is called or named after. and using that as a topographical focus to create some new challenges, briefs that we will use in the future. And finally here, I suppose the other reason why we need to convert research into revenue is to create the circular system and a sustainable system for the research systems. Um, some countries like Ireland are very lucky they have a significant amount of funding going into research. Some people might say not enough, but it is still significant. There's other countries that might not be so lucky and have a shortage of research funding, and obviously the European Union is a significant contributor to all research across European countries, both at a research level, but at an application level. And if you look at an initiative like Run EU, which we are part of, that is something that's um, about collaboration at a much higher level in terms of education and research. Just a little piece about myself. What am I? I'm coming to this talk from a very commercial perspective. I've worked for 17 years in an international food company. 10 years of that were based in the UK, operating around Europe. The other 7 years I was based in Ireland, but still spent a significant time of traveling around Europe. And then for 10 years, I ran my own business, focused on innovation and business development and bringing ideas and brokering ideas with SMEs, and also working with some regional agencies. While working for myself, I also went back and did a master's in international entrepreneurship. And that was at a point in time in my career where, like somebody described to me afterwards, I became more about solving problems, more about creating solutions than solving problems. A lot of my time in industry prior to that had been problem solving, integrating acquisitions, and opening up new markets. So, having done my master's, I joined another university called the Southeast Technological University, and I worked there for 8 years. And then 12 months ago, I joined TUS. And in both of those cases, my role is very much immersed around enterprise development. In this particular role, like I've described to you, I'm immersed within the research community, which has been an interesting and very fulfilling 12 months for me to understand the depths of research and the process that people work through. I suppose one of the differences, um, as I see it, between a researcher taking their business onto a marketplace is that, and maybe somebody coming from just bringing a business into a university as a spin out or a spin in. The researcher has made a decision around the topic that they've been researching. And like I said, if it's coming off the back of a PhD or a project, it usually has the minimum of about 3 years to 5 years work and maybe a lot more. So the depth of knowledge of the domain is very high, and the nature of the type of businesses that you would be setting up would be a little bit different, um, more embedded and probably more scientific in nature. So this is a model that I've developed over the last 12 months, but maybe more specifically over the last 3 months as I started to understand the landscape that I was working in and how do we help our researchers to start to maybe align with what they have been researching or are about to research and connecting with ultimately a revenue generating model. So you can see on this, I have 5 M's. Me as in the researcher, the motivation, making it happen, and the markets and the marketing. Now, the The reason I've come up with this is a combination of obviously what I've learned while out in industry, and more importantly, what I've learned in the last 12 months and the previous 8 years working within a public sector environment. And throughout my time in industry, and especially working with SMEs and being an SME, I got involved in a lot of problem solving, or maybe in some cases rescuing businesses, and maybe in some cases not able to rescue the business that had run into trouble. But I could safely say where there was problems, that in the vast majority of cases, the problem had arisen because the individual either who owned the business or operating in that particular environment had lost sight of their own North Star, or may not actually have started recognizing what their North Star was. What I mean by the North Star is, why are you doing what you're doing? Um, what motivated you to get involved in research? What motivated you to get involved in a particular topic? And what have you learned along the way? And sometimes people start off on a topic and they change, or sometimes I've come across people who may have been involved in research because that was the opening that came to them. And when I talk to them, you begin to realize that they have a passion for something else. A number of years ago, I remember talking to a researcher who was at an event, not as a researcher, but more as an entrepreneur, and they were promoting a new piece of technology for agriculture. And incorrectly, I had assumed that that's what he was researching while pursuing his PhD. And it wasn't until maybe about an hour into a conversation, it was um, 2 day event, that I asked him, well, how does this idea that you're working on align with your research and your PhD? And he said, it doesn't. It's completely different. But he had such a passion for what he was doing, um, in terms of this entrepreneurial idea, that I just inquired, well, how come you didn't align it? And he said, well, the opportunity wasn't there to do a PhD around agriculture, but he had ended up doing, I think, a PhD with someplace connected with the aerospace industry. So in his particular case, he didn't really have much of a choice, but um, that's why I think it's important that, especially if you're heading into a marketplace, that you might have done your formal research in a topic that was the most convenient for you at a time. My advice to anybody is, be very careful if you're trying to commercialize that or you're trying to bring it to a market. The best way and the best ideas coming to the market are the ones you're passionate about, because starting a business or working around enterprise development is a little bit trying to go and climb Mount Everest. There's a lot of twists and turns. There isn't, it's not really a straight line. You can read a lot about it, but actually when you get out there to do it, you have to be able to twist and go with the flow, and things don't happen the way you want them to happen, and they definitely don't happen in the timeline that you want them to happen in. And that's why it's so important to find individuals that have a similar mindset. And this is the area of motivation. Who are the people that are in your tribe? As a researcher, you may have that in the format of people within your team. If you're doing a PhD program, you might have it in the format of a supervisor. Sorry, and I just don't know. Is there a question from somebody?
No
Maybe
questions
not.
so far.
Okay.
I will
Okay.
let you know if there is any.
Okay. So, um, and that's again going back to finding a tribe. Um, some of the work that we are doing, we're trying to bring industry, you know, webinars, maybe in workshops together with the researchers. so that as the researcher's journey is developing, they become more connected to the industry that they want to operate in. And that's in a lot of cases to try and help to create those coincidences that might create connections that at least the researcher may end up working with some companies like that, but equally as important, they may end up integrating their research or maybe creating a spin-out. And in the context of connecting with the marketplace, you know, the the making it happen piece, I haven't gone into a lot of detail here because, like I said at the start, it's about that idea of practicality. Um, but the very simple piece about making it happen is, look at small bites that align to a bigger picture. Might sound very simple, but it was only late in my career and especially getting involved in innovation and research from an academic and a research center perspective that you begin to realize the power of the word piloting. Um, it's very important because when you're doing something as a pilot, it takes the pressure off of everybody um, about having certainty and having success. So it's a very good way and a very important step in bringing your idea into a market environment. Start with a pilot project, which allows you to test in a practice what works and what doesn't work. But I would also suggest um, make sure that you understand how this fits in with the bigger picture. And we'll touch on this a little bit later, but you know, I use a phrase here, and you can see it on the next area, looking at markets, about scanning the horizon. And most of you do this already, but you mightn't recognize it, observe what's happening. Um, in the role that I've been doing in the last 12 months, that's something that I'm continuously doing. What are the type of things I found out? I found out that the research community, both at a student and a staff level, has a very healthy appetite for practical examples in the marketplace. I found out that their schedule is so busy that sometimes they struggle to engage with future thinking, which is something that Anna and myself are looking at, how we bring some of those webinars together that um, prompt individuals to maybe step back or get insight into an industry. And also understood that the international dimension to our research community is a very rich asset, and it almost, sets the scene that your business idea, your market that you're going for, is often easier to be able to tap into at an international level, not just at an Irish level. And when I have here one to many, I'm talking about that piloting prospect as well, finding the member of your tribe that's willing to test and work on the project. One of the other pieces of insight that I learned again late in my career, that, you know, work with people that want what you have, not the people who need what you have. Because you often, people well intentioned will start looking at where where is this needed. And I give a practical example of a startup company I worked with about 5 or 6 years ago, who for about 12 months, 18 months, kept knocking on doors of companies that needed, in their eyes, what they were developing. And what they were working with was Earth observation data, which many of you know is very powerful in the context of natural resource management. And this particular gentleman was almost coming to a stage of giving up and saying that there wasn't a market. And knowingly or unknowingly, he he stumbled across some people who actually wanted what he had. And they weren't the people who were further back on the journey of discovery of Earth observation, they were actually people who were already using it, but wanted to use more of it and wanted to use it in a more sophisticated way. If I fast forward now, which is about 2 or 3 years later, he has 4 people working for him, and he has a continuous supply of projects coming from people that want what he has. And the people who need what he has, in some cases, have still not turned up. So be very careful of that. And don't underestimate the last point here, which is, you know, telling the story from why you're researching what you're doing, who are the people that you've met along the way that have an interest in it, what are the pilot prospects that you have, and what is the most suitable place or participants in that pilot project. I'm assuming along the way that, you know, sometimes the marketing of your story is actually a funding application to allow you to build something on that pathway towards impact. So this is go back to the two of the 5 M's. Um, who are you as a researcher? What influenced you? Um, how did you end up where you are as a researcher? How did you end up researching the topic? Maybe there's a topic that you're not researching, but you have more of a passion for. Don't be afraid to admit that. Maybe not to your supervisor, but if you're taking something into a marketplace, it's very important that you are absolutely honest with yourself. And that goes back to what I said to you before, that from my previous experience of working with people who, have got to a stage with a business or a career, it was usually where they lost alignment and the passion for something. Then the motivation, why does your research matter in a wider context? Who will benefit from it? What value does it create? And in this context, keep an eye out for industry operators, but equally and maybe more importantly, policy perspectives. So if you go back and look at, even in an Irish context, 20 years ago, if you had a wind turbine creating energy, it was probably considered alternative, and it wasn't really taken very seriously. If you're in the wind energy and associated supply chain in Ireland today, you're seen to be at the cutting edge of innovation. What's the difference in between? The difference in between is that policy caught up with the practice. And this is what you also have to remember. Sometimes you can be ahead of the curve. A number of years ago, there was some research done with I think it was one of the indexes in the US, and they looked at the top 100 companies, and they wanted to see was there any common thread in terms of something and some magical ingredient that made them successful. And the conclusion that they came to was timing. So they gave a couple of good examples, one of which was Airbnb. Um, it occurred at a time, obviously, when there was a significant downturn in the global economy. At one side, you had people with the idea that they'd rent out their spare room for extra income. And on the other side, you had a willing market who was interested in a combination of maybe a cheaper source of accommodation, but also a new experience. And this is going back to one of the things I said earlier, that, it's setting up a business, entering a market isn't a science. It's probably more of an art that's supported by science. The art is about understanding yourself, understanding the landscape that's around you. And that's what these two particular headings are about me and motivation. And again, just to reiterate there, that me is yourself. It's you as a researcher. So now maybe I'll stop sharing a second. I think everybody is back. Should be. Does anybody
Yes, we
want to
are all here.
share some details of your discussion or insights into your motivation or the landscape that you want to connect with?
It would be very interesting to hear because I heard rumors that there were some very, very vibrant conversations.
Just got there's a message here from Dora. Wonder is there somebody? Oh, yeah. So, okay. So it sounds like that we don't have people any contributors to check out but I think just what you were talking about, Mila, is that, for lots of different reasons, and also we develop interests. Sometimes people develop a different interest as time has progressed. Um, I've met researchers who may have started off as sociologists and now they've become scientists. And I think this is part of that journey of discovery, which is sometimes people have often said to me, well, an academic or a research world is not a very entrepreneurial world. Actually, I would say it's the complete opposite. It's actually absolutely entrepreneurial if you think about it, because that research environment, you're always looking for funding, you're always wondering where is the next piece. You have to be entrepreneurial. And I think this is something we touched on yesterday around the non-com framework. I know it's not what we're talking about today, but the fact that entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial thinking is not exclusive to a business world. I'm just going to put the slides back up again. You can see that screen okay, yeah?
Yes, we can see it perfectly.
Okay. So now that we've understood, and again, this is a very simplified version of back to the very start of the slide, practical way. This is more a framework rather than how to do, but making it happen and making something happen into a marketplace. These are 5 pillars that I would say you should understand. Um, think about the fact you've already had that discussion with yourself about why you're doing this, and you've started to identify who's around you or who could be around you or who should be around you in taking it forward in terms of a landscape, in terms of policy, um, in terms of practical application, um, coming through something like COVID. I talked earlier about the timing. If you think about that, there was a lot of research that was sitting on a shelf that was difficult to value at a point in time. And within the course of a month, it probably became something that was worth hundreds of millions, if not billions, because of a pandemic, which nobody thought would ever happen. And so, but we're assuming that if you're taking your research into a marketplace, it's not as um, dramatic as that. Who knows? Sometimes it might be. You always have to be ready. And that's why I think it's a good idea to have this type of a thought process throughout your research or even before you start it. Um, in the starting of any business or taking anything to a marketplace, it's always important to understand what you're good at and you enjoy doing, and understand maybe what you're not good at and what you don't enjoy doing. And this is where you consider the team. Sometimes, this will be in a very casual arrangement to start with because you may not have any funding. But get used to talking to the people and from the different domains that you might be interested in. If you're researching in science or technology, you don't feel comfortable marketing or you don't feel comfortable in business, start going to some of those events or meet friends of yours, have those conversations. And as the project gets closer to a marketplace, um, again, I think, you know, because if you think that at some point in time you will bring a team of people around an idea or you will connect with it, the values and the value of those people is very important. And that kind of goes back to what I had on the last slides about that tribe, that people with like-minded. Um, Also remember when you're entering a marketplace, it's a very, very different environment than if you're in the marketplace. So a startup is very different to a scale up, is very different to a very well-managed business that often has more of an issue with sustainability than it does with scaling these type of initiatives. So, uh, so the sorry, I just took on my slides. Um, Here, when you talk about you have a channel of supply, you've collaborators, you've stakeholders. This is really a process where you're thinking about, okay, what are my key ingredients? Your key ingredient might be your piece of research, but if your key ingredient includes somebody else's, if it's a physical product, it might be a piece of software which it doesn't a physical product. It might be a food product. It might be a sustainable raw material, might be a polymer, it might be whatever. Uh, get used to where these pieces of the jigsaw come from. And when you go from that research environment and you're heading towards a marketplace, think of the analogy of a kitchen. Um, you know, you can be working in a food company or a food ingredient company, and you can be producing something like a block of cheese. Well, when you come to making a consumer product, you need other people involved. You need other ingredients. You need an environment where you're going to mix stuff together. This comes back to the collaborators. So the collaborators are people who will actively engage. The stakeholders may be people who uh, have an interest in what you're doing, but won't um, actively engage with what you're doing. I'll give you a practical example. If you have a new idea and you're either bringing it to the marketplace as a new business, just for us at the moment, just assume you're talking about setting up a business. You'll find, I know in Ireland, and I'm sure it's the same, there's a lot of regional development agencies. And some of those agencies are more active than others. And this is where you may decide to go to an area where the stakeholder, which is the local authority, is more interested in what you're doing. And as a result of being more interested, they're more collaborative. Sometimes, yes, funding is an important part of it, but not the only thing. We all have this feeling of being in a place where people want us to succeed. And sometimes you go to a place and you get the feeling they don't really care whether you are successful or not. So don't underestimate that. You mightn't always have the choice, but um, this comes back to following the line of interest, which is usually the line of least resistance when you're trying to enter something into a new marketplace. Um, Sometimes you'll get a stakeholder, for example, again, the regional development agency that's interested in the particular science or product you have. they may be able to connect you with collaborators. So you can see here there's a common thread on all this at the starting phase. You want to get people that are coming to you with goodwill, that are coming to you with a common purpose. And even when you come to investment phases, a lot of investment is made by individuals that have an interest in a particular topic and are ultimately interested in engaging with people that have an interest in those topics. In the investment world or in financial um, venture capital world, you often hear people talk about somebody with domain knowledge, uh, and that's what they really mean, is that someone who has a passion for science, maybe renewable energy, maybe, ICT, um, then don't underestimate that alignment with thinking and that alignment with uh, a similar set of values. You might find that, and I'm sure we all now work in a very multicultural environment. So historically, businesses were used, the definition and the pathway for a new business was often said, well, get it up and running close to home, and then you take it onto an international market. Those days, I think, are disappeared. It depends. Sometimes you have, infrastructural issues which don't allow you to transfer it easily. But we're very much now in a marketplace with online communications that, uh, there isn't boundaries, there isn't barriers. For example, within the role that I'm doing at the moment, we're bringing together an international steering group, or a steering group. It didn't have to be international, but it makes a lot of sense that it is. But those people consist of gentlemen in Portugal who are interested in regional development, a lady who's in Australia who's originally from Ireland, but who has extensive uh, worked extensively in regional ecosystems and entrepreneurship. Uh, Professor, which is in a college very close to where we are, and also a gentleman in America who has an interest in the role of technology in society. So that's just an example of a steering group. But to all intents and purposes, when you're starting to bring something into a marketplace, that's really what you're looking for around you to start with. A steering group, somebody who will give you honest advice. And maybe sometimes that honest advice is, look, we need to tweak this. This isn't the right thing. Um, you always need to have those trusted people, not necessarily the people who will always give you the answer you want to hear. It's very important to bring people around you that give you an honest opinion, but maybe not necessarily the opinion you want, because a lot of good ideas haven't turned out the way they were anticipated. You may often have heard the example, I think, of the post-it note actually came from a project that was looking at glue, and the glue didn't work, so it was seen as a failure. And then somebody actually picked it up and thought, oh, maybe we can use this for something else. So this is the building blocks for. So when we look at the markets and marketing, um, the market of one is that piloting process. Do not underestimate it. It's a very, very valuable um, learning curve. If we go back to very, very simple format, a lot of food companies and a lot of food ideas would have started with a local farmers market, where somebody just went with an idea, they tried it, they got a market feedback. And it's also very good if you can, when you're working on a pilot project and you're getting paid to pilot something. It's a very good way of developing something. And in the research world now, there's a lot more what you'd be familiar with as cascade funding, which feeds off of large research funding. And it's a way of testing something or creating that living lab environment. So the policymakers and the funding agencies are interested in this feedback as well. And they recognize that it's a good way of learning. And for example, the European Space Agency have a very extensive funding stream that starts out by giving successful recipients something like 75 or £100,000 uh, as a feasibility study, but ultimately with the idea that they're creating something that's market ready. But they also then have the next scale of development, which is they call deployment, I think, or demonstration, and some of that can go up to about 250,000. So there's numerous examples now emerging of this pathway. So everybody is starting to recognize that you don't just take something directly off a research shelf and take it into the middle of a well-established market. You need to have the appropriate supports that you can navigate. You've heard me talk about this phrase, scanning the horizon. This is something that you will be used to doing anyway. But I'd say the first thing to do is recognize the filters that you would like to have and that you should have when you're doing that. The like-minded individuals, be aware of the opportunities, whether it is in a research environment or an industrial environment. You may stumble across somebody at a networking event or and this is what happens in this commercial world. This is what happens in the marketplace. Um, it's amazing the amount of times throughout my career that I've stumbled across somebody that had no intention but ended up with a significant outcome. A number of years ago, I attended a automotive event in the UK, and at the time I was working on a project with an electronics business in Ireland. And at the event in the UK, I happened to be sitting at lunchtime alongside a gentleman who had an automotive design business. We got talking about what he was working on and what I was working on. It transpired, like he said to me, I wish I met you 2 years ago, but I'd met you now. He happened to have a project where it was an initiative around a product called electrochromatic glass that was being put into a very high-end sports car. But that conversation converted into a project that was a combination of more development maybe than research, but there was a certain amount of research to start with, development and deployment that turned into something that had a total value of, I think, about 1.5 million. Um, just as I'm talking about that, only 2 weeks ago, I also met somebody. Now it was a little bit different. It was a somebody that I reached out to have a conversation. It was a lady who was working in a local authority. But the reason I reached out to her is because I saw someplace where she was involved in a project in an area that I had an interest in. And from the time of meeting her, within about 20 minutes, she had outlined to me four possibilities of how we should collaborate. For the same reason as I've just described to you earlier, we just happened to meet at the right time, but it wasn't a coincidence. In the first case, it probably just was a coincidence. Okay, in the case of attending the UK event, obviously we were both interested in innovation within the automotive industry. And this is the third point here when you're looking at the markets, um, keeping an eye on what's happening. Uh, like I've described to you, I said, the people that are writing papers, maybe the people who are posting some stuff on LinkedIn, what's happening with a policy. Practical example I have around policy is Ireland doesn't have its own space agency, and as a result of which it probably isn't as extensively involved in the space industry in Europe as other locations. About 12 months ago, I happened to be at an event in Luxembourg, and I became very aware very quickly that Luxembourg have a very, very strong policy around space industry and the use of the space industry for the realignment of climate and associated activities with natural resources. And so much so that I have been back there 3 times since. And but I had never intended to go there. It was purely by chance. I went to an event, but again, it was an event about the space industry. So yes, it was in some ways it was by chance, but when you trace back and join the dots, um, I had made a conscious decision that I wanted to be in a place that was engaging with space. So these are just some examples that people talk about, maybe market research, and a lot of it can be done on a desk. Do not underestimate meeting people in person, finding your way to an event. Yes, it might be good enough to just know it as an area that you're interested in. You sometimes, you'll go to an event. Okay, if it's costing you a lot of money, you'll probably make a lot of more calculated decisions. But there's a lot of events now that are online, and sometimes you'll come across speakers that might be of interest that you can follow up with. Um, I'm going to move on to the marketing piece here, but from all my time of dealing with entrepreneurs and dealing with, especially in the startup scenario, the two single biggest challenges I think that any individual has um, in getting something off the ground is presenting and communicating, and the second one is actually setting a price list. And in both cases, these are very, I suppose, personal scenarios. And your marketing message, creating that connection to a like mind, is back to telling the story. And don't underestimate, okay, when you're telling the story, you are telling the story about your research. Don't underestimate the value of telling the story about yourself. People deal with people, and especially they deal with people when they're in a startup environment where it's built on a lot of trust and a collaborative arrangement, and they go back to the piloting and entering a marketplace. And when you think about it, piloting can extend to the fact that you might be selling something into a retail shelf, but usually, you won't be given a big order, you'll be given a trial order. That's a form of piloting. Securing the value, um, I don't know, it's not a science, definitely, and it's some kind of an art. But what I mean by securing the value is understanding that the value of what you do is different to the cost of what you do. People often ask me, well, how do I price something? Um, it's a difficult question, and it doesn't have actually a straight answer. Sometimes you can take a product that costs so much and I'm going to add something onto it. You could be adding 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%, 100%. But in other scenarios, uh, this is something you always have to do. What's the value of what I'm delivering to somebody? I heard somebody saying one day, and this is ever before we had electronic funds transfer as we have now, or had Revolut, was talking about actually writing a check. And they said, the value of a pen is, usually something in euro, €2 max. But if you want to give it to somebody that's going to write you a check for 100,000, it's worth a lot more to you to get it as quickly as possible. So understand the value of your research Yes, you need to understand the cost of making it, but it's as much important to know the value of it and what the marketplace you're putting it into. Okay, so this is something else I'm not sure if we have enough of people online to consider it, and if you want to, into a Zoom room, but it's just a little an exercise. Um, Understand when you're going with an idea, um, how much do you need to make something happen? And also, as important is, what would you do with some funding if you got it? This is an exercise. Um, I'm just trying to check a second how many people we have. So maybe we will split into the rooms again for 10 minutes very quickly, just to get people to have a look at this, take a note of what's here. Um, what would you put 50,000 euros? Where would you put it within your research? And it can be anything. It can be to say, you're going to allow yourself the time for 6 months to investigate it further. I don't really mind. But get used to the idea that shaping your mind, that get ready to expect investment, whatever it is. There's a question that I ask a lot of people that I meet are working on ideas. What's the smallest thing that I can do to help them to make the biggest effect? And, think about why you would put this money into what area you want it. What do you expect in return for it? And what market would you explore first? It's just a little simple exercise to get you to think with an investor's mindset, um, which can be very different and is very different from the researcher's mindset. They're coming from a different place. The researcher is coming with a lot of curiosity. The investor is coming with a lot of currency mindset. So maybe if we can split, I can set up the room again just for 10 minutes to get people to have a quick discussion around this.
So is this now the group? Like it seems that people are vanishing from the participants list, but are they leaving or is it that?
I know the same thing was happening yesterday in the lectures group as well.
Yeah, I
People
don't
were going
understand
in
what's
and out of
happening.
rooms.
We are still in here, but
Yeah.
I
Maybe
don't know
maybe
if
I'll
we
say
need to
to
discuss anything.
Pader. But for yourselves, did you have any ideas then? We can discuss it here in the forum.
Yeah, I guess we can just share the thoughts. Yeah. I have some ideas. I have done some research on certain like pigmentation and already applied for funding for productization projects. So I think I would put the funding, this 50,000 into this.
And with pigmentation, do you mean like dealing with colorants and
Colorants? Yeah, we have been working a lot with textiles, but I think
yeah.
like paint
But it's
coating.
research
Yeah.
for instance, for skin or skin problems or not?
No, this is mainly for the like technical purposes, like paints and coatings and that kind
Okay.
of thing. So some kind of demonstration that could maybe show that okay, there's
Okay.
technical performance and some potential
and here in Tuus they're doing they have a project. It was called if I can remember it was based on colorants of plastic. So there were human cumin. It was a cumin was a project. I can't remember the name, but they were doing something similar.
Okay.
Yeah, because I asked because here in Leiria I teach image processing, and some years ago we had a project concerning skin cancers, and was to implement an application with your smartphone. You identify a small area and you see if it will be possible to be a cancer or a skin cancer or not. And therefore, we need to understand some knowledge about pigmentation.
Yeah. Yeah, we are not dealing with
Okay,
the.
it's a very interesting area. I believe we can put money in this field, research field.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, we're
And
investigating.
concerning the second question, why why we are going to put money in this field?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess if we are talking about this, like this coloration of, for instance, the like buildings and interiors and that kind of thing, so it has to do with the social comfort and that kind of thing, cultural things. We can promote using, for instance, wood in construction if we have nice treatments, coatings for the wood materials and that kind of thing. So I think there's one reason.
We'll be interested to include, for instance, circular economy to do some.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the point is that we are obtaining the pigments or the colorants from. Wait, sorry, my chair is broken. From like side stream materials. So from organic side streams that come from industrial processes. So it's quite a large quantity.
Okay. So the colleagues are enter now in this room.
I guess everybody is in the same room.
Don't let us disturb a very healthy conversation. That's it sounds like you have an idea of what you want to put the money into.
Yeah, I have, because I have already applied for maybe a similar purposes, some funding.
But of course, when we are talking about virtual money, it's very easy to get ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess is there expectation of return from of this investment, and what could it be?
So I spoke to some of the other people in one of the other rooms. I think the main thing here and the main purpose of just getting you to think like this for a 10-minute session is two things. Number one, think about that idea that, and some of this came to me many years ago where I was talking about something to do with an idea, and a gentleman who was an investor and had sufficient funding said to me, if I gave you 100,000 euros today, what would you spend it on? And I wasn't very clear in my dialogue with him. And he said, well, you shouldn't be looking for money unless you know exactly what you're going to spend it on. So that's one piece of it. The other piece, I think, is getting used to that mindset. And it's like a lot of things, don't be intimidated by it. The money markets can often be very intimidating piece, but when it comes down to it and you have an idea and take the time to find the right type of investor, you shouldn't feel intimidated. It should be just a conversation of where they're coming from. Remember, you have something equally as important. They're not just, it's not a one-sided affair, Just because they have the money, don't think that they hold the balance of power. So, and I think from a research perspective, making that step into that environment and do so as early as possible, and do so at a time when you don't need money. That's always the best time to look at something, is when you're not under pressure to look for it. I can't, or maybe I don't
Can I ask a question, Peter?
Yes, you can.
So, what do you think when we are trying to get some? We want immediately a return of the investment, but sometimes we need to stay and wait, for instance, 3 years, 4 years before we get some return of this money. What is your feeling about that?
Okay, so the first thing I would say is don't assume that return on investment is money.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
And that's really, really important. the European Space Agency, which is something that I'm deeply immersed in at the moment, their funding, a lot of it is to get their science and technology dispersed across society. That's the return that they are looking for from their investment,
Okay, thank you.
right? So that's just one example. And also, you know, when you're in this mindset and you're scanning the horizon, keep an eye on what is often philanthropic sources. You know, we've seen good examples all over the world where people make billions. They spend the first half of their life or 2/3 of their life creating billions, and they spend the last third of their life wondering where they're going to put it. So, with a researcher's mindset, that's where I would like to see more researchers become more commercially aware. Not because they need to give a financial return, but you're connecting with an individual's mindset, maybe as a philanthropic source, or an institutional mindset. Like there's a lot of things that you can do as an individual that big organizations can't do.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm not going to be able to pronounce your name. Is it Paive?
My name is Carlos
Yes, but the lady
Campos.
who,
Yeah, yeah,
In
it's
English,
Päivi.
it's Charles Fields.
Charles.
Charles Fields.
How do I pronounce your name?
It's Päivi.
Paive.
Yeah.
Do you, I'm sorry now, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you want to share some of the insight? You said you were already thinking about funding, or you're in that headspace or part of it, looking for, do you have a project that you're working on or something?
Yeah, well, we do have a kind of project that is at the threshold of becoming commercialized at some point, hopefully. And I think
Okay.
it's the point where the public funding kind of ends, and then we have to think of the investors and some other sources, because that's, at least in the Finnish system, we don't have much like research funding available for this kind of thing. So I'm looking for some like a productization project where after that maybe some company or a startup could take care of the commercialization. And I think that's quite a tricky phase of the research, that when we want things to become available and realized, then that's that's where I was thinking.
Okay.
With it, yeah.
What I've learned on my own journey of discovery is that sometimes people talk about things being tricky or interesting, and it can also be exciting. You know, it's that combination of being frustrating and exciting. But my only advice to you is, you know, like I've described on these slides in the last hour, you just have to stay surfing the horizon or scanning the horizon. Maybe put yourself in places, which I'm sure you're already doing, that you might find those individuals. And don't underestimate the power without, you know, you don't have to say exactly what the project is or the details of it, but the power of the internet and something like LinkedIn, you know. And also, it depends on the type of project, but go back to Carlos' question about the return on investment. You know, think about somebody who might see value in what you have that they mightn't have to put in money into. You know, sometimes you often see this type of collaboration, maybe where somebody has a project that needs a lot of capital investment for equipment, but they might find an industry partner who already has the equipment and has the production facilities and is quite happy to work on some kind of a collaborative arrangement. So investment doesn't always have to be currency, and the return on investment doesn't always have to be currency. Okay, I have a few more slides, I think. Any questions from anybody else? You can see the slides again, yeah? Okay, so I think this might be my last slide or very close to it. The good thing about being in any job, I think, whether you're a researcher or in industry, you always look back and think, I wish I knew then what I know now. I've worked in industry for over 35 years. I've never published a paper, but about 6, 9 months ago, we were launching in the college what is called an immersive research institute. And I came from the launch realizing that I had been immersed in research for 35 years. The fact that I hadn't written a paper shouldn't make a difference because it was informal research. That's what you have to be when you're developing a business. So whether you're coming from a formal or informal perspective, it's like a lot of things in life. It can be intimidating to start with, but when you get used to it, you wonder afterwards, what was all the hassle about? Scanning the horizon, I don't know of any alternative. And when you scan the horizon, you pick out things with your own perspective. This comes back to your motivation for why you're doing something. And my dealing with researchers or entrepreneurs or anybody with an idea, when you have the time and the opportunity to ask a few questions and dig a little bit deeper, or you're having a cup of coffee or a glass of wine at some event, you find out actually, what really is motivating their activities. And don't underestimate that each individual's motivation is almost like a filter to what gaps they'll see. So people see opportunities in different scenarios. Practice does not always follow policy. Be policy aware and practice active. Sometimes policy follows practice. And I don't know if any of you have ever been involved in European projects where you have policy makers that actively engage with meetups or think tanks, and they're there to listen to an opinion, but also to get ideas about what people might be doing. A number of years ago, I was part of what was an EIP Agri initiative, which, if you're familiar, it's a European Innovation Partnership. It was around digitalization of agriculture and rural environments. But those think tanks used to happen, I think I attended them once a year for 5 years. But probably in year 4 and definitely in year 5, it started to shape what was then subsequently another large project called Smart Agri Hubs, which at a point in time got about £20 million worth of investment. So it opened my eyes to the fact that, policymakers are actively looking at what's happening in practice, and then they convert it into policy as a method of introducing it to society in a mass market. Watch out for the people who are like-minded. It doesn't make the journey easy, but it might make the journey easier. You don't have to waste a lot of energy trying to persuade them. And anything that makes the journey easier is always enjoyable. The harsh reality is that markets never lie. You might have a great idea, but if you don't have enough of other individuals that are willing to pay for it, then it's not a sustainable venture. And that might be not forever. It might be just the timing. I'm sure people who engage their life in research find it invigorating. The revenue is an income and the reward is satisfying. And I suppose that brings me to the last slide, which, I think everybody is looking for this circularity of research systems where you're creating something that's relevant, that creates revenue, that enhances society, that's looking for more relevance, to create more revenue, to be more regenerative. Thank you.